Mark had been traveling a different path across Alaska's mountains and glaciers. Although he had never been there before, he had heard from a buddy who had been a few years earlier how lovely it was. But while he was moving, he noticed something odd frozen in the ice. Although the boat was a sight to behold, he was astounded by what he saw when he got on board. He lost control when he entered the helm and yelled at what he saw. Welcome to USA Stories channel. Do not forget to subscribe and activate the bell button to receive all new updates. Now let's go to the story. Mark chose to take a vacation to Alaska this year on the advice of one of his friends, since he couldn't control himself when he was on the unknown road. Even though he had left years prior, Mark had consented when his friend advised him to take this less traveled way. It never occurred to him that he might discover something similar. Although he hadn't heard many others discussing this option, he had faith in his friend. They had shown him how to hike to a remote and picturesque location on the glaciers where few people would normally be found. Mark was intrigued by this notion because he enjoyed exploring new locations, but he couldn't help but worry whether Tyler had seen and neglected to tell him. It had been suggested by his friend. Mark observed something when he got to his destination that he never would have thought to see in a setting like this. He anticipated seeing a stunning, expansive area of snow with craggy mountains in the background. Even though that explained part of what he saw, it did not alleviate his confusion regarding the bright yellow object in the middle of the landscape. He was expecting a text message, but instead, he saw Tyler's caller ID. With wrinkled brows, he answered the phone. "Yo, Tyler, what's up?" Mark inquired. "What the heck is that boat on the ice, Mark? Did you add that using Photoshop to your image or something?" Tyler queries. Mark was even more perplexed by this. Had Tyler really been serious? "What are you trying to say? I assumed you brought me here to play pranks on me. Are you implying that throughout your visit here last year, you were blind to this?" Mark started to become nervous, waiting for Tyler's response. How could something just come out of nowhere if it hadn't been here the year before? "No, dude. When I was there last year, that was definitely not there. Is it possible for you to FaceTime me?" Tyler remarked. "I truly want to believe you, but everything seems so unlikely that I have to see it with my own two eyes." At his friend's remarks, Mark grinned. "You're not physically here. I'll be FaceTiming when I enter if my phone coverage permits it. In this manner, you are still there with me, even if only a little." At this, he saw Tyler nod. Mark moved over and, when first encountering the object, began to realize just how massive it was. How was he going to get inside it at all? Tyler said, "Maybe you have to walk around it to find a way to get on," while he was still on the phone. At this, Mark gave a nod. If they were going to investigate its contents, they had to go on the boat. "Yes, you are correct. Let's carry that out." Mark stepped gingerly onto the deck. He took caution where he stepped. The deck appeared to be relatively vacant as I looked about. Tyler said, "We should go inside, but it would turn out to be a grave error." Mark found the door leading into the control panel. Mark approached it gently, taking notes to show his friend what he observed. Then he unsealed the door and shined his flashlight inside. Something caught in his throat, the air. With his breath apparent in the cold air, Mark entered the boat's dimly illuminated cabin. It just took for one of the figurines to appear to move slightly at that moment. Mark's panic burst into a cry of terror that broke through the glacier's frigid silence, and the gadget fell out of his hand and hit the wood floor with a clatter. The phone connection with Tyler ended abruptly, and the screen turned black. There was an unbearable quiet for a while. He felt as though the frigid boat walls were closing in on him, and the darkness was oppressive. He made himself take one step, then another, his steps unsteady and unsure. As Mark scurried out of the spacecraft, his feet skidded on the ice surface. His eyes kept darting back over his shoulder, as if he thought something could come spilling out of the boat. The boat's yellow hull was a striking contrast to the white background, a strange outlier amid the icy terrain. In an attempt to get as far away from the unsettling spacecraft as possible, he picked up his speed. It seemed to take forever to get back to safety as Mark retreated from the ship. With each stride Mark made, doubt seeped into his mind. Did he truly witness what he believed he had seen? Was this lonely environment just playing tricks on his mind? Gradually, as the ship vanished from sight, Mark started to feel relieved. The air felt less oppressive the farther he traveled. almost as though he was leaving a heavy burden behind. With hands still shaking from the cold and terror, Mark took out his phone as soon as he felt secure enough to move away from the ship. With a faltering voice, he called the local authorities and reported what he had discovered. "A boat is submerged in the ice. It is more than a boat. There's a problem with it," he stumbled. The words were insufficient, incapable of expressing the complete horror of what he had witnessed. On the other end of the telephone, the dispatcher sounded cold and skeptical. Mark stammered over his words as he attempted to describe the situation. There were figures organized in a circle inside the boat. His voice was full of passion as he stated, "It felt wrong, terrifying." Despite sensing the dispatcher's suspicion, he persisted in his desperation to make clear how terrible the situation was. The whole experience felt even more weird because of the dispatcher's tone of skepticism. When the dispatcher finally spoke, there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice. They questioned, "Are you sure about what you saw, sir?" "Yes, without a doubt. You must send someone, please." "It's not right," he said, emphasizing the severity of his request. Eventually, the dispatcher did agree to send a unit to look into it, but doubt persisted. Mark hung up the phone, shaking from the adrenaline hangover and the cold, and sought a protected place to wait. The cops were moving, approaching the boat with a mixture of mistrust and fascination on their faces when they eventually arrived. Mark felt both relief and trepidation at the same time. Though he was relieved to be alone no longer, he was plagued with worry about what the police might or may not discover. Mark held on to a shaky hope as they got closer to where the boat was. He hoped that the cops would see what he did and that they would recognize and corroborate his account. Mark inhaled deeply as he stood at the edge of the meadow where the boat was waiting, steeling himself for what was to follow. He led the way with a nod to the cops, the boat towering ahead like a ghost from a long-forgotten story. The police officer's demeanor changed from skepticism to measured interest when they arrived at the scene. They were taken aback when they saw the enormous yellow ship against the stark white background of the glacier. As he and the officers made their way back to the ship, Mark started to feel anxious again. He had a shaky sense of security knowing the cops were with him, but it was insufficient to erase the fear that gripped him. With renewed care, the police approached their inquiry, considering the ship to be a possible crime scene. After securing the area with barricades, they began recording everything. Mark watched in horror as the officers changed from being doubters to detectives, totally focused on solving the ship's riddle. The cops gingerly made their way into the cabin, looking at the black stains on the walls and floor, as well as the unsettling arrangement of bones. They discussed the many circumstances that may have given rise to such a spectacle in quiet, serious tones. The air was heavy with the unsaid, and the mood was strained. They were cautious not to spoil the moment as they shot pictures from every angle. The police officers gathered close together and spoke quietly about what they had discovered, heard bits and pieces of their talk, and Mark could tell they were frustrated. The mystery was further made more complex by the admission that the bones and blood were fake. The reason behind setting up such a setup perplexed the investigators. Mark chose to give Tyler a call to get additional details because he could still clearly recall his shock upon first seeing the ship's picture. Tyler's answer just made the mystery more complex. He affirmed that when he had visited the glacier a year prior, the boat had not been there. The police were interested by this new knowledge, which added another jigsaw piece to the puzzle. It seemed nearly inconceivable that the ship had come in such a short amount of time and no one had noticed. Eventually, the inquiry came to a standstill. There were no definitive answers from the ship's findings on how or why it ended up on the glacier. The origins and purpose of the ship, along with its manufactured horrors, remained a mystery. The police probe produced no useful leads. Searching through their records and contacting other departments, they were unable to find anything that would account for the ship's existence or its strange cargo. Mark struggled to accept that the whole thing was strange. A part of him was confused by the unexplainable nature of what he had discovered, and another part felt silly for being so afraid. The mystery surrounding the ship persisted even after Mark and the police departed the area, its mysteries concealed in the glacier's frigid depths. A fresh lead emerged a few days after the inquiry hit a roadblock. After learning about the mystery boat, An amateur videographer in the area got in touch with the police. Mark was in the police station, listening carefully to what the filmmaker had to say. He explained that he knew the ship from the news and claimed to have important information about it. His expertise appeared to be the final component lacking from the confusing picture that had confounded all those concerned. The director disclosed that the boat was a prop for a low-budget movie he was producing. As Mark processed this knowledge, his eyebrows shot up in amazement. The director explained that the ship was the perfect fit for their project's subject because of its dramatic appearance and remote setting. This insight cast new light on the strange event that Mark had experienced, changing the story from one of terror to one of creative activity. The explanation from the director helped the jigsaw pieces start to fit together. The fake blood and staged skeletons were props, not evidence of a real-life catastrophe. Mark had a wave of comfort at realizing the nature of what he had found. The police officers appeared to be happy that the case was moving away from the darker aspects they had been concerned about. The boat, which had been a major feature in their movie, was abandoned as the crew withdrew from the hostile Alaskan terrain. It was obvious that they intended to go back for the boat, but a number of practical issues had made that impossible. The director said that it had been a tough choice, and he regretted keeping the set in place. After the secret was revealed, Mark had an odd range of feelings. Now, in lieu of the terror and worry he felt amusement and incredulity. He was laughing uncontrollably at how ridiculous the whole thing seemed. It appeared almost too bizarre to be true, yet what he had thought to be a horrific scene turned out to be nothing more than an abandoned movie set. Following the event, Mark noticed that he was thinking back on it. He considered the ease with which fiction may be mistaken for reality, and vice versa. The episode had served as a reminder of the unpredictable nature of life and the blurry boundary between fact and fantasy. Mark took one more glance behind him as he exited the police station. His mind raced with ideas about the peculiar and surprising turns that life may take. Please remember to subscribe to our channel, give us a thumbs up, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our videos. If you enjoyed the tale, the next video that plays on your screen will probably move you too.